This is Jason DeBoard from the Original Prop blog, and today I'm doing a video about Star Wars lightsabers. Specifically, Luke's lightsaber from Star Wars A New Hope. This is prompted by the upcoming Profiles in History Hollywood Auction 96 4-day auction. And as I mentioned when I did an overall preview of their catalog a couple days ago, I was going to do something specific about this Luke lightsaber just because there's a lot of interest in it. It's an important piece. There's always a lot of debate about these things when they come up for auction. And this one's taking place on December 13th, I believe is the day this is specifically being auctioned as part of the 4-day auction. So why is there always a lot of discussion and debate about these Luke lightsabers from both Star Wars A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back? And if you're a Star Wars fan, you know probably that the original prop was based on a found part, which basically means it's, something that pre-exists in the world. The people that worked on the film found it and they kind of added some decoration to it, and then voila, you have a lightsaber. So because of that, if you're a fan of the film, and a lot of people do this, you can actually go out and find those parts and make your own replica lightsaber that pretty much looks exactly or near exact to the original prop that was used. So because of that, they're very difficult to authenticate because, in terms of a physical inspection, you can make your own replica basically. I mean, I'm not that handy of a guy, but when I was collecting replica props, I made my own, Luke lightsaber from A New Hope. It wasn't that difficult. So the found part is a camera flash from a vintage camera called a Graflex. So if you take a look at this picture, we've got a camera here, and then on the side is this flash gun, and then there's a bulb here. I don't know if, it's kind of a little washed out, and then this dish behind it, so when the camera flashes, it would kind of spread the light out. So it might look kind of familiar to you if you're a Star Wars fan. So, basically they covered where it says Graflex here with tape, and then on the other side of this, they took a bubble strip from a vintage calculator and stuck that in there and made some bubbles, and they put what's called T-grip on the lower half, this black kind of rubbery looking strips that make the grip. That's where the bubble strip goes. Some silver tape there, and then a D-ring on the bottom. So yeah, someone sent me this is what the D-ring looks like on the bottom. You can buy one for $7. I don't know what the going rate is currently on the vintage flash guns, 15 or more years ago when I was into replicas. I think they were $200 to $300. You could get one that looked basically brand new. They're really plentiful. So anyway, that's just a little bit of background. That's why people are always like, oh, when these come up for auction, it's like, how do you know it's real? So why am I doing this video? So, people might be watching this who have no idea who I am. So if you go to my website, the Original Prop blog, I've been doing articles since 2007, basically just kind of trying to make note of things happening in this art market and sharing information and kind of tying together information. I don't really have some angle on this other than participating kind of in the public debate about these pieces and trying to bring clarity to things and, kind of entering into discussions about issues that face this collecting hobby. And obviously when something like this comes up and it's got an estimate of $150,000 to $200,000, it's I think it's fair to bring some scrutiny and ask some questions about it, because if it's authentic, then it should be self-evident. I guess there should be enough to back that up. And I always say, if you read my website, one of the best sources for original props and costumes is from principals that worked on the films themselves. And in this case, we actually have a really good principal who worked on this film. It's actually the art director, Roger Christian. He's the consigner. He's public about it. He wrote a letter of authenticity. And he's the one that actually made these for Star Wars A New Hope. He got an Academy Award for his work on the film. So, it's hard to get a better source than that. So, that would be a huge plus in the plus column, because the physical examination, you can't, as far as I know, no one has screen matched this piece. I don't know if there's any claims that it was used in a specific scene. So anyway, I'm just going to sort of take you on a journey to take a look at some information. And, some of it is, I just think it all kind of pertains in some way. So I'm not trying to slant the discussion one way or another. It's really just presenting information, maybe asking a few questions, and then people can just, make up their own minds about it. Because I've heard, people say things one way or another about this. So, like I said, I've been doing this website, the Original Prop Blog, for a long time. Back in 2008, Elstree Props, which was a company that involved people that actually worked at Elstree Studios at the time Star Wars was filmed. And back in 2008, they put on eBay what they called original prototype lightsabers from 1976 meeting. So I'm not going to go into all the details about this, but they have all this backstory about Elstree Props and Lucasfilm and John Steers and documents. My point with sort of referencing this article, and I'll put a link in the YouTube description, is that people do come forward that, had some involvement in these films with documents, and sometimes it just doesn't quite add up. They have these documents from a meeting about the lightsabers, and I'm not really disputing those documents, but they had these flash guns that they were claiming were, quote, prototypes. Well, if you looked at the official Star Wars book, The Making of Star Wars, I kind of go into what author J.W. Rinsler found in his research with people that worked on the film and the Lucasfilm archives and everything. And there was actually a photo of prototypes, and there's actually, those were obviously illustrations. And then there's these photos of prototypes, which you would think this relates to those meeting notes, and they don't look anything like what was actually used in the film. So, I was just taking issue with the claim that they were prototypes, which has a very specific meaning. And these images, these are prototypes, apparently. They're in the official book, that was licensed by Lucasfilm. So I'm just saying, there are people that are involved in, the making of these films, and sometimes they bring things up for auction, and it just doesn't make sense. So I'm just saying it's not unprecedented. Profiles in History, who's the auctioneer for this specific Luke A New Hope lightsaber, they've actually put other lightsabers up for auction in the past. Some have sold, and a couple have been pulled from auction. So my point here is that they have come forth, put things in their auction catalog and said, this is authentic. And, for whatever reason, they pull it. So, I'd done an article back in 2010 for a lightsaber that was attributed to use by the character of Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi, and people had questions about it. And I happened to be at Profiles in History, and I had an opportunity to talk to Joe Maddalena directly about it. And I've got that video here, and I'm just going to play it because it's not very long. It's 2.5 minutes.
The Darth Vader lightsaber. Yeah, now, this is not a hero lightsaber. The hero lightsabers are made out of a camera flash, okay? This is a resin lightsaber. This was made by Stuart Freeborn. Freeborn did all of the special effects for this film, A Return of the Jedi. This is used specifically in the scene where Vader's holding it, Luke chops off his hand, and it flies out of his hand. Okay, it was used just in that scene. Freeborn made the hands. It's actually a mold of his son's hand, and he made at least 4 of these. Now, people have suggested, because they can't absolutely screen match this one because the scene goes by that fast that it's not authentic. Bob Burns has one. Every one of these is different. No 2 of anything on Star Wars was the same. People don't understand. They weren't sitting there in a paint shop like, what color black are you using? What color gray are you using? They're making this stuff. They're in production. They're hurried. They want to get these things done. The Energizer Bunny lightsaber that people are questioning was made by Lucasfilm to look like a lightsaber and is in the Lucasfilm archives. Has nothing to do with Stuart Freeborn. Stuart Freeborn did not work on the Star Wars Energizer Bunny commercial. So that we have to put to rest once and for all. Because if it was that lightsaber, it would be the property of Lucasfilms, and it would be theirs. It's not. This was acquired directly from Stuart Freeborn by Gary Kurtz. Now, all of the Freeborn material that's come onto the market has been unquestioned to date. No one's challenged one thing. It's because we have this, and other people didn't get the opportunity to get it from Stuart Freeborn. And I think that's what you're seeing is typical sour grapes. And, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. This is an authentic lightsaber used in that scene in which multiples were made. And we know that because we have Stuart Freeborn and we have Gary Kurtz to tell us that. If people don't think that's good enough, I don't know what else to tell you because, everybody has an opinion which they're entitled to. But, I don't think Gary Kurtz or Stuart Freeborn is going to lie about this. It would make absolutely no sense.
So, I did that video. I put it up on May 31st, 2010. And then, let's see. Oh, this doesn't show the date, but basically shortly thereafter, it was pulled from the auction. So, and that's a piece that was attributed to Stuart Freeborn, and then apparently he was basically saying that he gave it to Gary Kurtz, and then it came through them, presumably through the Gary Kurtz Jason Joyner archive. So, I'm just saying it's not unprecedented for an auction house to back a piece and then remove it from auction. Earlier this year, so in May 2018, on May 3rd, the same auction house, Profiles in History, they had a screen-used Obi-Wan Kenobe lightsaber from Star Wars A New Hope. So that was, 7 months ago. And the day the catalog came out, there was a big discussion about it on the Replica Prop Forum. So I did this article kind of pointing to that and memorializing the auction description. It said it came with a signed letter of provenance from a trustee of the family who's gifted the lightsaber by costume designer John Mollo 15 years ago. This is the only trilogy Obi-Wan's lightsaber we have ever encountered, without question, one of the most prized Star Wars artifacts one could ever hope to attain. An icon in science fiction cinema history, an estimate of $150,000 to $200,000, which I think is the same estimate as this piece. Oh, this one's $150,000 to $200,000. So anyway, I put up this link. There was further discussion on the Replica Prop Forum. People were basically, because of their analysis of the body of the lightsaber, which is another found part, same as Luke's lightsaber as a camera flash. This was a British vintage grenade, and the example up for auction matched kind of the unique construction of a replica that someone had made. And later that night, I believe, or is either later that night or the next morning, it got pulled from auction. So, not trying to pick on profiles in history. I'm just saying these things do come up for auction sometimes, and they do get pulled. So just because it's in an auction catalog and it's from a source that goes back to a principle in the production, things happen. So that's just a little bit of backstory about lightsabers and kind of why I do these articles and why I'm doing these videos. So this, like I said, this comes from Roger Christian, who the current one, the one in the auction that's happening in a week from now, comes from Roger Christian. He has been very engaging with fans and the public, which is great. Over the years, he's talked about his work on the film. He's answered tons of questions, and we'll get to that a little bit more later. He also put out a book called Cinema Alchemist, Designing Star Wars and Alien. So in his book, this is an excerpt from his book, he describes kind of the birth of the lightsaber. So I won't read this whole thing, but he's basically saying he went into this camera shop. I believe he was looking for lenses for Luke's binoculars, and then he found these flash guns, and that's, he had this moment of realization, like that's it, it's the Holy Grail. So he says he held one in his hand. It was a perfect weight and size. He says, I had found the treasure that was eluding me, and I knew exactly what to do with it to disguise it. Peter bought the lot of them, and I headed straight back to Elstree Studios. I went to my room and closed the door. I got out my supply of black rubber T-strip, which is, I'm interjecting here, that's the grip material. And continue, it says, the same I'd used on the Stormtroopers' guns. I needed to alter the handle to look like a weapon handle. I cut the T-section rubber carefully to length and shaped the ends to look finished. I got out my constant companion, a tube of super glue, and stuck each of the 7 strips on carefully so that they were evenly spaced around the round handle. I had some chrome tape in different widths. I found an old strip of LED lights from a scrap Texas Instruments calculator that I liked the look of, and the 7 magnifying bubbles were ideal. I had broken it down to find any interesting parts inside and had saved these in my box of found objects. They fitted exactly into the small mounting clip and I left on the original, and it looked like another function round the hilt. I superglued this on to further disguise the original and to add a feature that looked like some form of adjuster. And there before my eyes was a lightsaber. I added a strip of chrome tape around the shaft to hide the Graflex name, and I called George to come. So he says, George came across my room, took one look, held it and smiled. I knew then we had found the one prop eluding us, and that has since become the iconic image of Star Wars. George's only request was, could I attach a ring on the end so he could hang it on Luke's belt for filming in Tunisia? This was achieved the same day. A matching chromed metal ring bought for a few pence was screwed on, and voila, we had the first lightsaber handle. Time was so short, this prototype was used in the movie. I made up a second one myself as a spare and instructed the prop boys to treat it like gold dust, as we needed a non-functioning one in Tunisia. I made up a couple more for John Steers so he could work on them. So he continues. He says, a meeting was called with John Steers to examine my lightsaber and discuss how to make the blade. This meeting was documented in the production files and has been used as evidence by a company selling replicas in an attempt to say that John Steers and his team bought the Graflex handles and designed them. So I'm going to interject here. So I just want to kind of make the point that, Star Wars was made over 40 years ago. And sometimes people misremember things. Sometimes someone wants to take more credit for a specific thing than they're entitled to. So even among like principal people that worked on the film, you kind of have to take everything with a grain of salt because of those factors. So I'm going to continue here. It says, Peter Dunlop and I bought all the handles for the film from Brunnings, the photographer's shop, where I discovered them. My buyer, Peter Dunlop, sourced them all. I bought a few for myself as I loved them as objects and made my own mock-up of the lightsaber exactly as I had created them. He goes on to say, and kind of my question is, well, is this the mock-up? Was it like never filmed? Was it never used on set? This is kind of a question. He said he made his own mock-up of the lightsaber exactly as created him, but he doesn't say when he made it either. Did he make it during production? Did he make it after production? It's not specific. So that's just a question I have. Is this the quote mock-up? I don't know. So it says, I appreciated them simply as beautiful objects to keep. He goes on to say, Gary Kurtz, who was the producer of the film, Gary Kurtz sold one for $250,000 a couple of years ago. Not bad for one I made for a few pounds from scrap, and an indication of the iconic status of this rather beautiful object is risen to. So, as I mentioned, Profiles has sold some Luke, or I should say some Star Wars lightsabers. So specifically in December of 2008, this is a page from their auction catalog. They had a lightsaber that they claimed was from Star Wars and Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. So they were claiming this was from both films. And there are differences between the lightsabers used in A New Hope versus The Empire Strikes Back. Namely, the strip, that calculator bubble strip, was replaced by kind of a gold strip that was another found part. And then they put these rivets in the T-strip handles to help keep these, I presume, attached to the lightsaber. Because obviously in the first film, Luke didn't really fight anyone. He didn't really use it that much, other than turning it on in this scene and then training on the Millennium Falcon. So there are differences, and it would make sense if they retained the New Hope lightsabers that they would convert them to the Empire Strikes Back ones. As an example, and I have articles about this on my website. Brandon Ellinger from Prop Store has an original Luke Skywalker Return of the Jedi lightsaber, and that was actually repurposed from Obi-Wan's lightsaber, his fighting lightsaber from A New Hope. So they did reuse things. And there's also another example of a Luke Empire Strikes Back fighting saber that was repurposed into a Darth Vader Return of the Jedi lightsaber. And I'm going to get to that in a moment, but I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about these auctions. So this auction took place. This piece came from Gary Kurtz. So that's what Roger Christian was referring to in that excerpt from his book that I just mentioned. So obviously he was fully well aware that one of these props that he made sold for a lot of money. And I made a note for myself here. So that piece sold for $240,000 in December 2008. And then it came back up for auction in June of 2017. It's the same piece. I believe it was originally purchased by Paul Allen for his museum. I might be mistaken. And then it reappears in 2017, last year, with Profiles in History. It even references, I believe, the prior sale. So it's the same piece. It's one lightsaber sold 2 times. So the first time it went up for sale, it sold for $240,000. The second time, almost 10 years later, it sold for $450,000. So almost $500,000. So it was purchased by Ripley's Believe It or Not. And they've been very public about owning this. This is a press release from them. Edward Mayer, Vice President of Exhibits and Archives for Ripley's Believe It or Not, acquired the piece at Profiles in History Hollywood auction on June 28th, 2017 for a staggering $450,000. He says Luke Skywalker's original lightsaber is the crown jewel in our Hollywood memorabilia collection. It is the most important and famous movie prop of all time. So since they purchased it last year, they've been touring this publicly. So I get these notifications a lot where it's like popping up in different towns, limited engagement. They have similar kind of press releases. They have these kind of flashy publicity posters, and they're getting the public to come out and see this Luke Skywalker original lightsaber. So that's just a little bit of history on that. And, so that brings us to now. So, Profiles in History, they sold that last example last year for $450,000. So we get to this 4-day auction, and this was puzzling to me. If you watched my overall preview of this sale, you can see kind of my natural reaction when I kind of put this together, because I didn't preview it. I was looking at it in real time for the first time in that video. I was like, if you had an original Luke Skywalker lightsaber that, Ripley's, they're basically saying, it is the most important and famous movie prop of all time, and you get another one, wouldn't you put it on the auction cover? I'm still completely baffled by that. So, like, what trumps the nearly $500,000 Luke Skywalker lightsaber is a photograph of Metropolis that has an estimate of $3,000 to $5,000. So I'm just totally baffled. I don't know. I don't get it. It's just strange. The only thing I can think of is maybe because the Obi-Wan lightsaber that they had in their catalog during the summer that they pulled, maybe they thought, well, what if this happens again? We don't want something on the cover that's going to get pulled. So I don't know. That's complete speculation. It's just kind of baffling to me. So that brings us to this lightsaber. So I'm going to read this description. I'll try to be quick. So it says, original production used Luke Skywalker lightsaber from Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, from the collection of Oscar-winning set director Roger Christian, who built all the original lightsabers for the first Star Wars film. This lightsaber is consigned directly from Roger Christian, the original set decorator for Star Wars. Included is a signed letter of authenticity from Christian stating the following. So what I'm about to read is actually what's on the LOA. Quote, as the Academy Award-winning set director for Star Wars A New Hope, one of my responsibilities was to make the iconic lightsaber for Luke Skywalker. The one below in the picture in Tunisia is one of them I created based on the Graflex flash handle. I handmade about 5. Keep that in mind. I handmade about 5 to use during the filming, and the one you were buying is one of those used throughout the filming in London. This is the actual design of the lightsaber from A New Hope, presented to Luke by Obi-Wan Kenobe as his father's weapon and part of my private collection. The original design had the bubble strip I placed in the clip. You can clearly see here and on the pictures below, each lightsaber was handmade by me as set director using whatever I could lay my hands on at the time to create the T-strip for the handle, the D-ring on the end, and the bubble strip. My invention of creating the weapons, props, and sets using real guns, scrap airplane parts, and found objects gave Star Wars the organic reality look for the first time in science fiction cinema. This lightsaber below is one of the originals, and it is authenticated as made by me, the maker of Luke's lightsaber, for which I won the Academy Award, signed Roger Christian, October 2017. And that's kind of interesting that it's dated, over a year ago, October 2017. It doesn't mean anything, it's just interesting to me. So it's basically saying they're including the book, his LOA, and it has an estimate of $150,000 to $200,000. I've got some photos here. So these are the catalog images. So you can see it's the Graflex, it's got the strips, the D-ring, the bubbles. It doesn't have the tape. It looks like it's in amazingly pristine condition, but you know, Luke didn't really use it much in the film. So this is the letter of authenticity here. This is what it looks like. Okay, so are there any other confirmed authentic pieces outside of what's been auctioned from Profiles in History? I'm aware of two, let's call them Graflex lightsabers in the archives. These are images that are actually they're exclusively on my website. I published these some time ago. I received them from Jim Latta, who worked for Icons, who was the licensee that made the replica lightsabers back in the 90s. So he had access to the archives and he took these photos. So there's two. There's a Luke lightsaber that in its present condition was of the look of Empire Strikes Back, and I believe this is called the Ranch Saber. And then there's a Darth Vader Return of the Jedi lightsaber that's built on a Graflex that people, I think, believe was formerly a Luke fighting lightsaber in Empire Strikes Back. Like they converted it to be a Darth Vader fighting lightsaber in Return of the Jedi. So I just want to show you these to show you what a lightsaber in the Lucasfilm archives looks like. So you can see it has that different strip. It's got the rivets that are super rusted. Like this thing is beat up. And this, I believe, has been in the Lucasfilm archives since filming. So, you know, once it's there, you'd think they would have taken okay care with it. I mean, it's just metal. So, yeah, it's like super rusty. There's the tape that, you know, I mentioned was missing off the other one. And you can tell it's probably like coming off. Just some different angles. So you took measurements. So there's the D-ring, and it's very different looking. It's all squared off, super rusty. It's everything on this thing is rusty. Yeah, there's a better look at the D-ring with two screws. You know, it's real different. But I think there's from photos, it looks like there was a lot of variation between these things. So this is the Vader one that's built on a Graflex, but it's designed to look like the Darth Vader lightsaber. But I believe these are just, as far as I know, these are the only two, like, absolutely no question about it, confirmed authentic Graflex lightsaber examples because they're in the archives. Okay, so that's that. Okay, so this this auction for this lightsaber has gotten a lot of press, and it seems to be ramping up as we're getting closer to the auction day. So this is a Reuters story that was published yesterday about the lightsaber that includes this video with Brian Chanis from Profiles in History describing the lightsaber. So I thought this would be important to play.
As far as Star Wars memorabilia is concerned, this offering is unprecedented. You know, you don't have so many items like the screen-used lightsaber, the screen-used stormtrooper and TIE fighter helmets, the cameras that were used for all of the visual effects sequences. You just will not see another grouping like this ever offered again. Luke Skywalker's lightsaber from Star Wars: A New Hope, 1977, the original Star Wars, came from the set decorator who won the Academy Award for the film. You know, we're expecting $150,000 to $250,000 on that piece.
Okay, so, you know, he might have been talking casually, but he referred to it as screen used. I mean, I don't know if that's their official position. The catalog description, I believe, says production used. Yeah, so it says original production used Luke Skywalker lightsaber. And he just referred to it as screen used, which means it was used on set, filmed, and typically people, you know, there's varying positions on it, but a lot of people think if you say screen use, that means kind of screen matched. I don't know. For me, it just means filmed. So that was yesterday. There's been a lot of press about it. And then one thing that kind of blew up with a lot of press and activity on social media today was Mark Hamill, who plays Luke Skywalker. He posted on Twitter, and this has gotten a lot of play. He was responding to a Fortune magazine article talking about the lightsaber, and Mark Hamill says, "Be advised, there was no one lightsaber I used in the films, but many, many, both for myself and my stunt double. Multiple duplicate backup props are commonplace during production. When the handle ridges were cutting my hands, they even made a few with soft sponge ridges. Hashtag buyer beware." So, you know, this kind of turned into some clickbait articles. My reading of what he's saying, he's not saying it's authentic. He's not saying it's not authentic. I think he must have read something where it presented it as like, this is the Luke lightsaber, and he's basically saying no, there are like a lot of them, which is absolutely true. But you know, in today's sort of social media clickbait kind of environment, I think things kind of take on a life of their own. This has gotten like, you know, 12,000 likes, 1,700 retweets, probably more. I haven't refreshed this page for a while. So Roger Christian actually responded directly to Mark Hamill and his comments with 2 tweets of his own. And he says, "I personally made 5 for filming by hand individually in my office with grafter parts I brought in, and the scrap calculator bubble strip and D-ring. I used strip for the handle, whatever I could find in my scrap, all super glued together by me, no one else. This is one of them." So he's saying 5 were used, and he made 5 total, and this is one of those 5. His second tweet, he says, "I made them myself and gave them to the special effects, one to add the wood dowel blade to catch light. I handmade every prop and prototypes of every weapon." So they're kind of talking about 2 different things, but regardless, there's sort of this little bit of comment and reaction there. This is an example of one of those kind of clickbait news articles. There's lots of these today. So BBC News, Mark Hamill questions Luke Skywalker lightsaber auction. And I can't really agree with that title. He's just saying it's not one, there's not only one, there's more than one. So they quote his tweet, and then there's actually a response within this article from Roger Christian. It says, "But the Academy Award winning production designer for the original Star Wars film, Roger Christian, told the BBC the lightsaber is an original. There are 5 originals I handmade myself, and this is one of them," he said. "It is real. I've got the Oscar to prove it." Mr. Christian said the low budget meant he was putting together lots of different elements to make the props, meaning all the lightsabers are unique. He says, I was super gluing things together. They all look different. Again, they're kind of talking about different things, like the articles saying, Mark Hamill questions the auction, which he isn't really. He's just saying, hey, there's not just one lightsaber. There's multiple lightsabers. And then, Roger Christian's saying, he's kind of being defensive, saying he has the Oscar to prove it. So I don't know. Kind of weird, kind of interesting. I wanted to just make a note here. He did he's done a couple, I think, Reddit AMAs, the Ask Me Anything, where basically he goes on to Reddit and real time people ask him questions and he provides answers. So, there's kind of this retelling of the story. So this is from 2015, okay? So he's talking about how he showed George the lightsaber, and these are all in his own words, he says. And then he just asked me to add a little ring on the end, and this is consistent also with his book. So he says, and then he just asked me to add a little ring on the end because for Tunisia, it didn't fire up, but we needed to hang it on Luke's belt, and that went out to Tunisia. I made 2 of them, and that's the one that Obi-Wan brings from the trunk, and the one that he gives to Luke and says, that was your father's. That's the one I made for £8, about $12. So 3 years ago, he was saying he made 2 of them, and today, literally today, he's saying there are 5 originals I handmade myself. And again, it's 40 years ago. People misremember, but it's just interesting, I guess. So this is the same AMA. He's saying here, it was fairly late in the day. I'd made all the weapons. I made Luke's binoculars. I made the rest of the things I'd needed. It was the laser sword that I needed, and it was late in the day that I found it. I love this object. I've got one in my hand now. I'm making some exactly as I made the originals. I've had the T-strip made exactly as I put on the first one. And I've had bubble strips made identically to the ones that I used. I'm making a few of those. I don't know what I will do with them. Maybe I'll auction them off. I know people would love them, and they're not saying they're used in Star Wars, but they are prototypes of what I'd made. So I think, why not? So 3 years ago, he was on a Reddit, Ask Me Anything, and he was talking about how he's had someone make the T-strip, grip material reproduction, bubble strip reproduction, and that he was contemplating making these and putting them up for auction. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting. This is another AMA. I believe this was actually a different one for his for another project. But he talks about the lightsabers. He says, well, the handles, I've got about 9 of the handles. I loved the shape and the feel of them, so I bought about 9 of them, which I still need to make up. I wanted my T-strip material right, and I've got the bubble strip now for the clip, so that's all correct, so I can put them together. So, he's talking about making exact replicas 3 years ago. So this is a CBC interview from also 3 years ago, from 2015. So I just wanted to kind of play a little bit of these just to give you a sense of how he was talking about these lightsabers 3 years ago.
What I had to do is get these made, because there's so many questions about this. This is exactly duplicated, everything. This is the exact as I made on the first one, everything.
Now I'm less afraid. I've held it once. Just have to have 2 hands.
Yeah, they were done with super glue. That's all I had. And the props were all made with that, so they lasted on the film.
Amazing.
I left it for the moment so people could see, but this just chrome tape literally went round it. That's all I did for the film, because I thought I'd better hide the name.
Okay, so that's a little segment there, and then this I teed up a little bit into it. This I think is like that was like behind the scenes. This is like more of the formal broadcast interview.
Flash handles. I just took one in my hand and thought, there it is, and I raced to my office back at EMI Studios, stuck the same T-strip that I put around the Stormtrooper's gun for a handle. I'd broken down some calculators, found this bubble strip here that magnified the numbers, stuck that in. I stuck chrome tape round it to disguise it and called George and said, you better come and have a look at this, because I knew that was his kind of real iconic image for the film, and he just held it in his hand and smiled, and that from George is the biggest accolade you can get. And we added a D-ring on the back here, which because George needed to hang it on his belt in the desert, and that's exactly, I made 2 or 3 of these, and they're the ones that came out of the trunk in Obi-Wan's cave that he gave to Luke.
What was it about that object that you saw that you connected immediately to the mythology?
So again, back in 2015, he was consistently saying he made 2 or 3. And now that there's one at auction, he made 5. It doesn't really make any difference whether it's authentic or not. It's just an inconsistency that, is kind of puzzling. I just wanted to jump over to the replica prop forum, the RPF. So this lightsaber was on display at the Profiles in History booth at San Diego Comic-Con back in July of this year, 2018. And that's when people kind of started discussing this piece, because there were pictures. I actually put pictures on my own website. They're referencing a Facebook group, which actually applied to and did not get approved. I explained why. I told them I was doing some research for an article, and I was never approved. But anyway, I'll put a link to this in my article and in my description. But it's, I'm not going to read all these comments, but I've gotten messages from people who have exchanged emails with Roger Christian over the years that kind of highlight some inconsistencies. I'm not going to read those emails. I'm not going to show those emails. I don't have permission from both parties to do so. I think some of that kind of pops up a little bit in this public replica prop forum discussion. Like this member here is saying, because he's been kind of going around with that, like in that video I just showed where he's holding one, and the question is that the one in this auction, is that a replica? And this person's saying, at first I thought this was one of the ones he carried around for cons and interviews, which we know to be a vintage with replica accessories, but this one looks different. There's no chrome tape covering the Graflex logo, and the tracks are somewhat angled on the ends, while also not on the others. The tracks on his personal one were not angled. Also, Roger mentioned this in a conversation with me last year. He says, I finally managed to get one of my originals from my storage lockbox. I made a few after I sent the first 2 I sent to Tunisia. I had a run out of the Stormtrooper strips used on the first 2, so used what I could that matched. No one ever knew they all looked the same. So I guess the guy was kind of questioning about this auction, and he got a message from Roger Christian saying he implies there's more than one original. He says, I finally managed to get one of my originals from my storage lockbox. I guess you could read it either way, but anyway, he's basically saying he's had one in storage for years. So he says, so I thought, could this Profiles in History Graflex be that one? I messaged him, and this was his reply. And let me see if this will pop open. He says, "Hi Cal, that is mine. I got my original from storage and decided to let it go to a collector as I need to fund my documentary, Behind the Force, the real heroes behind the first Star Wars and what they did with the little money to make the film possible to be made and the impact on the world and why it was unique in cinema and legend." And then there's the picture of the display at San Diego Comic-Con. So he kind of does a little analysis. He says, from what I can, these are actually pictures from my website. I can see my watermark. From what I can tell, the bottom tube has a Graflex ink stamping and the glass eye is an INC style as well. The bubbles appear to have been trimmed down in thickness too, as the lever is able to close all the way down. The D-ring clip looks more rounded as well, rather than straight sides with a rounded top. And it looks a tad smaller than what we've been using, meaning what they've been using for replicas. The way it's attached is also different from what we're used to. Another member also managed to get a reply from Roger, and it was revealed that he had indeed used a screw to attach the D-ring holder, as he told me previously, but also that the screw had a square hole, what another member called a Robertson variety. But until now, I'm unable to find a straight-on view of the bottom, which would show the actual profile of the T-tracks. Does it look like the exact ones used in Empire Strikes Back to you guys? Yeah, so the funny thing is when I took those pictures, it was at an angle where I really couldn't get a picture of the bottom. And then when I went to the profiles booth the next day, it's actually turned around the other way. So it was even more impossible to get a picture. But anyway, there's kind of an ongoing debate. You know, someone says, almost looks like he had an old Graflex in storage and possibly used some modern parts to convert it. The T-tracks don't look to have the accurate profile, though he does say that he found something else. They remind me of Saber Freak tracks, but in black, and I guess Saber Freak is probably someone that makes, you know, replica parts. The D-ring looks like a modern variety run-of-the-mill example, and it's mounted slap in the middle of the bottom, which doesn't look all that terribly refined. Still cool he made it. And someone else says he's saying this one is made for A New Hope, different from the newer ones he made when doing his press tours over the last couple years. Someone says that's right. This is the saber he brings to conventions and media appearances. I think he mentioned those are Gino's tracks, and Gino's another guy who makes replica parts. As you can see, there are differences from the profiles and history display. So people are saying this, the one at auction's different from the replica he's been kind of touring with, like with that example, with that video we just saw. Anyway, it goes on and on and on and on. You know, people, these are the guys that really know this stuff in and out. You know, and I say that in the context of this piece coming from the guy who literally made it. So again, you know, take everything with a grain of salt, but you know, I don't really have a real objective with this video other than to kind of highlight things, information that's publicly available that I find curious. You know, I always tell people about authentication that you start out with something being inconclusive, and then if it's authentic, someone has to prove to you that it's authentic beyond, you know, reasonable doubt. If it's fake, I have kind of the same criteria. You have to really prove that it's fake. Otherwise, it just remains inconclusive. And, you know, so I'm not saying this is authentic. I'm not saying it's fake. I'm saying I have questions about it, and I'm curious to see more public debate about it. I would love for it to be real. I think that would be awesome, that, you know, there's a true Luke, A New Hope, Star Wars lightsaber example out there that wasn't thrown away or converted to an Empire Strikes Back version or whatever, that there's still one out there. But, you know, I have questions about this piece, and I'm curious to see how all this unfolds over the next week. If you have any insights, you know, make a comment. And if I come across anything interesting or there's any new developments, then maybe I'll do a follow-up video. But I just kind of wanted to memorialize sort of the pre-auction state of things, because, you know, once something sells, then it becomes real, and that's kind of the end of that, and the story's over. So that was really my only objective. Thanks for watching. And like I said, if you have any information, you can email me, jason@originalpropblog.com, confidential or otherwise, or public, or post a public comment below. Thanks.